Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring you today's most pressing issues from across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mok-yeon. After 15 months of brutal conflict and deadlock, a fragile ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has finally been brokered, bringing a temporary halt to the violence that has devastated the region. With former U.S. President Joe Biden and the incumbent Donald Trump both claiming credit for influencing the deal, the situation is ripe for intense scrutiny. As the ceasefire begins and faces, questions loom over its long-term viability, the unresolved humanitarian crisis, and the broader geopolitical consequences. So will this agreement hold, and what does it mean for the future of the Middle East? For this, we invite Moamen Gouda, professor of Middle Eastern Studies at Hankuk University of Foreign Studies, here in the studio with us. Thank you for coming in, Professor.
My pleasure.
And also joining us is Seung-hoon Baek, researcher at the Institute of Middle East Studies. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you for having me to your show.
Thank you. So let's start a discussion with Professor Gouda. The Israeli government has finally given the final approval for a ceasefire with Hamas. Could you tell us the background behind this agreement, which comes after 15 months of deadlock?
Yes, I mean, more or less, this agreement was the same agreement that was given to both sides of the conflict in last May 2024 by Biden administration. However, of course, I think what happened is that we have Israel seized this opportunity to expand its frontiers and to destroy other enemies in the region, the Middle East, including Hezbollah and weakening Iran and so on. So this comes at a time where we have witnessed 15 months of brutal devastation. It started on 7th of October, of course, 2023. We are talking about 1,400 Israeli deaths and 250 hostages. On the other hand, we are talking here about 40,000 official deaths registered in Gaza. 60% are women and children, where we have also 10,000 under the rebels, 100,000 injured, and complete devastation of the Gaza Strip. So the background is very, very hard, and it's very brutal, and it's very bloody. However, I mean, now some people are being optimistic, but we have to wait and see what will happen. I think the main key here was that the Trump administration, or the key word would be Trump, who made a huge leap when it comes to putting pressure on Israel to have to agree with this deal.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's also ask these questions to Dr. Baek. Following the ceasefire between Israel and Hamas, both former U.S. President Joe Biden and his successor, Donald Trump, have each highlighted their roles in the process. I wonder, what are your thoughts, Dr. Baek? Do you think this is a result of Biden's persistent diplomacy, or is it the outcome of strong pressure from the Trump side?
So this recent ceasefire between Israel and Hamas has sparked a debate in U.S. politics about whether the credit should go to President Biden for his persistent diplomacy or to the pressure-driven approach fostered under former, President Trump. So, but the truth, I mean, to be honest with you, to giving my thoughts, is that this outcome was less about individual leadership style and more about the geopolitical realities on the ground. I mean, President Biden administration has worked tirelessly to engage in behind the scene diplomacy, mobilizing international actors and urging the restraint. And his focus has been on coalition building and ensuring humanitarian consideration remain parts of the discussion. I mean, this reflects a more traditional, measured approach to the diplomacy. On the other hand, Trump administration took a very different path by empowering Israel to act as a regional enforcer and giving it a broadly way. I mean, so his approach arguably solidified Israel's position as a dominant power. So this strategy created an environment where Israel could dictate the terms, further weakening its adversary, including Hamas, and setting the stage for agreement like the current truce. So ultimately, this ceasefire is less a testament to either Biden's or Trump's individual contribution and more a reflection of the power asymmetry between Israel and Hamas. Israel's superior military and diplomatic standing left Hamas with few viable options but to accept the ceasefire. So while Biden's diplomacy persistence might have helped in sealing the agreement and Trump's prior policies may have laid the groundwork, the real driver here is the context. Israel dominance and Hamas diminished capability to resist. It is a reminder that while U.S. leadership plays a role, the balance of power in the region remains a decisive factor. So, in my opinion, it's neither of them work. I mean, all the key, like I kind of argued all the time. I mean, key for the peaceful negotiation here is definitely Israel has it.
All right. So could be neither or could be both, right? And it's centered on the situation within the Israel and Hamas. Now, let's talk more on the ceasefire itself. It went into effect on January 19th local time, and it's implemented in 3 different phases. Professor, can you elaborate for us the key contents of the phases?
Sure. So the first stage is taking place and it will last for 6 weeks, 42 days. It will have the release of 33 actually, Israeli hostages, including civilian women, female soldiers, children, elderly, and sick. On the other hand, there is some sort of an equation where for every non-militant, 30 Palestinian prisoners will be released. For militants, 50 Palestinian prisoners. We're talking here about around 1,900 Palestinian prisoners released. I would like just to mention something here because it's not really mentioned a lot in the media. Before the onset of the 7th of October, Israel had 5,200 Palestinian prisoners. After the onset in November 2023, we are talking about 8,300 Palestinian prisoners. Now, with the release of 1,890 Palestinian prisoners, still the overall effect is negligible regarding the amount of Palestinian prisoners that were imprisoned during the time of conflict. So actually, I wouldn't say this is a big victory for the Palestinian side. Also, I would say also that we have 600 trucks per day of humanitarian aid, which is much, much needed entering into Gaza Strip. We are talking also about Israeli forces only withdrawing from some areas in Gaza. We don't talk about full withdrawal. So this is the first stage. The second, there should be some talks about the second stage and third stage, but it's all left up in the clouds. We don't really know what will actually happen on the ground, but the talks so far is that the second stage will have a permanent ceasefire and permanent end to the war. We will have some are saying that Hamas should have no existence in the Gaza Strip, which is, I think, very, very hard. Also, Israel will have to have full withdrawal from the Gaza Strip. Third stage would have reconstruction of Gaza. But I have to say, we just have to wait for the 6 weeks and see what will happen because it's all up in the air.
Right. So as our Professor Gouda has mentioned, the first phase, which is the last 6 weeks, is being carried out as Israeli hostages and Palestinian prisoners are being exchanged. Now, both sides are expected to conduct negotiations for the phase 2 and phase 3 aimed at permanent ceasefire. Dr. Beck, what kind of variables do you think will affect the negotiations over the terms of the agreement?
So as the first phase of the hostage prisoner exchange is underway, the 6 weeks, so both sides are now navigating the delicate process of negotiating phases of 2 and 3 with the ambitious goal of reaching a permanent ceasefire. So, but like what you have just said, this negotiation are fraught with several variables that could heavily influence the outcome. The first one is the balance of power, which remains a critical factor. Israel military and strategic advantage ensure it will approach this talk from a position of a strength, pushing for terms that reinforce its security priorities. Conversely, Hamas, having suffered significant losses in a weakened and become a weakened state, this disparity will shape the scope of concession each side is willing or able to make. And the second one is international pressure and mediation. So it will play a pivotal role. So the key actors like United States, Egypt, Qatar, and United Nations will need to. United States has a key. United States have to solely strike a balance between supporting Israel's security concern and addressing Palestinians' grievances. So the credibility of these mediators in ensuring compliance and fairness will be tested throughout the process. And it is another key for the permanent ceasefire. And another significant variable is internal political dynamics of both sides. For Israel, the domestic pressure on Prime Minister Netanyahu's government to demonstrate strength while avoiding further escalation will be immense. And on the Palestinian side, Hamas must navigate internal divisions and prove to its supporter that it can secure meaningful concession despite its weakened position, such as two-state solution. They have to keep this two-state solution alive. If that is not the case, then Hamas will gonna not stop and halt this peace negotiation because hostage is their only bargaining chips. And finally, the human factor must be considered. Public sentiment on both sides, shaped by years of conflict and suffering, will impact the leaders' flexibility in the talks. In particular, the issues of long-term solutions such as blockade on Gaza or settlement expansion in West Bank will be critical flashpoints that could either pave the way for the progress of the peaceful ceasefire or derail the negotiation entirely.
Right, so there's a lot of factors that could sway the future of this negotiations in the second and third phases. But in a very disappointing announcement, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said the country reserves the right to resume war at any time with continued U.S. support. So he's trying to stress that the ceasefire could only be temporary and it depends on Hamas's actions. Professor, what do you think is the intention behind the statement?
Actually, the ceasefire, if you look at it carefully, it puts Israel in a stronger position. Israel can at any time resume its military action on Gaza. And you're also looking at the Middle East from a geopolitical perspective and from a macro perspective. You see the Middle East has now been completely reshaped since 1.5 years ago. Syria is now have a new leadership. The axis of resistance led by Iran is totally devastated now. So actually Israel is in power. And this is why Netanyahu have a golden opportunity to do whatever he wants to do. And of course, he's supported by many inside Israel now. His ratings at the beginning of this conflict was really bad, but now he's still, celebrated by many in Israel. And with the continuation of the current, I would say, some intimidation from the Hamas side. I mean, we are seeing the pictures by Hamas militants again in Gaza Strip, and this increases the amount of problems that we see. I mean, at the end of the day, we have to think about the Palestinian civilians here, the people who are really suffering. I mean, I don't think they need more problems so far, but we see that Israel, I think, will seize this opportunity and will continue with its actions because of the Hamas intimidation so far.
Mm-hmm. But turning back to the situation within Israel and Hamas, although the Israeli cabinet has approved the ceasefire agreement with Hamas, internal conflicts, including opposition from far-right factions, are raising doubts about the sustainability of the ceasefire. Dr. Beck, how would you view the situation?
So like what you just have said, while the Israel cabinet's approval of the ceasefire agreement with Hamas marks a critical step toward de-escalation, the international conflict within Israel, particularly opposition from far-right faction, casts a significant doubt on the sustainability of the truce. So the far-right elements in Netanyahu's coalition government have voiced strong objection to the agreement, arguing that any concession to Hamas undermines Israel's security and strength. These factions will considerable influences. And their resistance could pressure Netanyahu to adopt a harder line or even risk destabilizing his already fragile government. So this internal discord adds an additional layer of complexities of an already delicate situation. I mean, on last Sunday, a couple of days ago, National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir has resigned from the cabinet of Netanyahu. Clearly shows us that the evidence that the Netanyahu leadership is very fragile without this far-right this support. So on the ground, the ceasefire sustainability hinges on whether both sides adhere to its terms. Israel far-right critics could push for aggressive policies such as continued settlement expansion in West Bank or harsher measure in Gaza, actions that could provoke Palestinian retaliation and collapse the agreement. So more of this internal division might also weaken Israel's negotiating position in the subsequent phase aimed at the permanent ceasefire. If the government is unable to present a unified front, it could embolden Hamas to exploit these fractures, potentially leading to a breakdown in talks.
Right, so we'll have to see how the situation goes. Now, Professor Gouda, you mentioned a while ago that 600 trucks were on the way in terms of humanitarian assistance. Despite the ceasefire agreement that has been, made already, what kind of humanitarian issues do you think need to be addressed more?
I think this is a great question because many of us are sometimes forgetting that the people who suffer on the ground are really innocent. They are civilians who are being suffered now. So just to mention some numbers here, 95% of the people in Gaza were displaced. 85% of the damaged of the hospitals are damaged and destroyed. 70% of water infrastructure is completely damaged. 90% of those people are living on humanitarian aid. 20% of schools are completely damaged. So the amount of catastrophic damage that happened to Gaza is actually, sometimes when you see pictures, it's some estimations that this is more than what happened to Dresden and Hamburg at the same time in World War II combined. So the amount of humanitarian aid is much, much needed. And I think also this will have long-term effect on the people, because even if we give them the humanitarian aid that's needed, and we're talking about 600 trucks per day, this is not, I don't think this is enough, because 20% of the trucks are aimed to fuel. For electricity and so on. We have to remember that the electricity available for them is only 20% of their potential capabilities. So the humanitarian aid is much needed, and I hope that both parties, especially the Palestinian leadership, if there is some sort of leadership, they can look at those civilians and they could focus on what's best for them in the next few steps. Other than that, I'm really pessimistic about what's happening.
Right. So really, there needs to be more things to be done to support the people who are suffering.
Definitely.
Now, our Professor Gouda has mentioned a while ago that the 15-month war has completely reshaped the Middle East. Dr. Beck, what kind of changes, could you elaborate for us, have occurred in the Middle East due to the war that lasted for this long period of time?
Massive. I mean, like what you just said, Professor Gouda have mentioned this. I mean, this war, which lasted for a year and 3 months, has profoundly reshaped the Middle East geopolitical and security dynamics, leaving behind significant shifts that will have long-term implications for the region. First and foremost, the weakening of Islamist militant groups like Hamas and Hezbollah is notable outcome. Both organizations have faced significant military and operational setbacks during the conflict. Hamas, in particular, has suffered extensive infrastructure damage, loss of leadership figures, and dwindling public support due to the humanitarian toll in Gaza. Similarly, Hezbollah's capacity to project influence has been constrained. Partly due to the group entanglement in the Syrian conflict and Lebanon's ongoing economic crisis. However, while this group are weakened militarily, their ideological appeal may persist, especially among disenfranchised population. For example, in Syria, Alawis who are actually part of Shiite ideology are outcasted, and if these groups are not included in Syrian, nation building process, then there are higher possibility that they will going to fall into the spheres of Shiite influences of Iran. So this ideological resilience remains a potential flashpoint for the future instability. So second, closer ties between Iran and Russia have emerged as a political development. This relationship has deepened through military cooperation, particularly regarding drone technologies and shared strategic goals in Syria and beyond. So Iran's growing alignment with Russia signals a pivot in regional power dynamics, with Tehran seeking to counterbalance U.S. and Western influence by strengthening its tie to Moscow and Beijing. So like what Professor Gouda have said, I mean, like it is kind of like now Middle East are now making a big shift and a new alignment. So we have to keep an eye on this as well.
So like Dr. Beck has mentioned, there are concerns that this unstable geopolitical landscape following the weakening of Hamas and Hezbollah's power create an opportunity for new waves of Islamic extremism, which will further destabilize the region. What are your thoughts, Professor?
Actually, you have all the ingredients needed for a continuation or even the increase in terrorism happening in the region. And of course, also outside the region, we have to remember this. We have grievance, we have trauma, mental trauma, we have unstable neighborhood, Syria and so on. This is all unstable. We have young age, the youth are the ones who are suffering. We have economic situation who is totally deplorable. And we know also that when we have bad economic situation, usually people, and this is all over the societies, usually religiosity increases with the lack of economic development. People tend to rely more on the metaphysical aspect of religion. So also when we have more religiosity, we will have more radicalization and more suited area for more radicalism. So also this will have long-term effect, mark my words. This will not end soon. We will have radicalism happening in the next 10, 20 years because of this conflict. And I think Israel knows about this, and the international parties all know about this, and they are bargaining on this issue that they will try to use this as a security playing card, for the ongoing negotiations. Now we have some news, and I think also Dr. Pick shares with me this idea that Saudi Arabia is now trying to have a link with Israel for a new peace negotiation. I think this will be on the playing cards, that this can something that they should work with this together regarding the security issue with the ongoing conflict.
Right. So we'll really have to see, and the prospects really.
You have to wait and see, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
It will be tough.
Right. Now, former President Donald Trump has declared that a peace policy based on power will continue in the Middle East, and Dr. Beck, is there a possibility that he will pursue a maximum pressure strategy against Iran, as he did during his first term? And if so, what kind of impact do you think this could have on the Middle East situation?
The possibility is high, and if Trump pursued the strategies based on power again, the impact on the Middle East could be profound and multifaceted. So, on the one hand, maximum pressure could weaken Iran's economy further, limiting its ability to fund proxies like Hezbollah and Hamas. And this might provide short-term stability by reducing the operational capabilities of this group. However, it could also have significant unintended consequences. The first, Iran's response is likely to escalate regional tensions. As seen during the Trump first term, Iran retaliated with increased nuclear enrichment, attacks on oil infrastructures, and bolstered support for their militant proxies. A renewed maximum pressure campaign could push Iran further down this path, risking open confrontation in the critical area like the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point for global oil supplies, and not only by using proxies such as Houthis to close the Gulf of Aden and etc. And second, such a policy could strain U.S. relation with key allies. European nations have consistently favored diplomatic engagement over aggressive sanctions, and a unilateral return to maximum pressure might deepen the transatlantic divide. Additionally, Gulf states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, while wary of Iran, are increasingly pursuing pragmatic engagement with Tehran to avoid further instability. So, I mean, so there are it is multifaceted. So, yes, whether Trump pushes his so-called power-based maximum pressure, I mean, the result or consequences that he really wants are very difficult to be achieved. So, like what Professor Gouda have said, we have to wait and see and how the situation will going to progress. But it's not a simple formula. The Middle Eastern politics and problem will not going to be solved in grand bargaining or one the policy. So we have to see and give a very what do we call thoroughly analysis on understanding what is actually happening on the ground.
Gentlemen, we will have to leave our discussion right here. Thank you so much for your insights tonight, Professor Gouda.
Thank you so much.
And Dr. Beck, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.